The writing tool Scrivener is well known for the organization and flexibility it brings to authors, and three of its most powerful features are Find, Project Search, and Collections. We're all pretty used to find and replace, but Scrivener has some useful options that I think are worth going over. Project Search goes well beyond the simple act of searching through a manuscript for a string. It allows you to search through your entire project, including your notes on plot, your characters, the world, and all the documentation that you've created for all of those things. And it lets you search in a number of different ways. And collections are a way to organize your chapters and scenes, and they can be created by hand or dynamically. Once you've mastered them, Find, Project Search, and Collections can be some of the most useful tools in your arsenal as a writer. And so I thought I'd dedicate this video to the ins and outs of those three tools in particular. In addition to the basic functionality, I've developed some tips and tricks that I use while writing, and also to help clean up my manuscript before I turn it in to my agent or editor. So stick around for those as well. Hi, I'm Beaulieu, and I'm a full-time fantasy and science fiction author. I've published a dozen novels, more than 20 short stories, and I really enjoy talking about the craft of writing, which is why I started this channel, A Novel Approach. A Novel Approach is dedicated to helping you reach your writing goals by sharing inspiration, technique, and insights into the craft and business of writing. It's hard-earned knowledge that I've gathered from my 20-plus years of experience in writing and publishing, and my goal is to pass as much of it as I can on to you to make your journey to publication easier. We'll jump into the main content in just one second, but before we do, I wanted to let you know that this video doesn't have a sponsor, but it is supported by those of you who get value out of these instructional videos. I'm adding new content all the time, so I hope you'll like, subscribe, and share, or even check out my books via my website, quillings.com. Thanks so much for your support. It's because of you that I can continue to make free videos just like this one. Okay, let's dive in. We'll start with Find and Replace, but I did want to mention that if you're new to Scrivener, I did create a top 10 features for those who are simply curious about what makes Scrivener so great. I also made a How to Get Started in Scrivener video for those who are ready to take the plunge but need a little guidance on how to get started. So check those out on my channel. Now let's focus on the project we created in that how-to video. So just a quick reminder, when you're in Scrivener, everything is driven from the binder on the left-hand side over here. And when you select one or more of the scrivenings, maybe it's the manuscript, maybe it's a chapter with a scene, maybe a chapter with a couple of scenes, or even the other types of scrivenings you might have, like information on the world or the characters, whatever you select will show up in the center pane, and it will either be in the scrivenings view, the corkboard view, or the outline view, or actually none of the three. So if these are all grayed out, you're going to want to select one. So I'm going to select scrivenings. That's what we're going to use most commonly here. And then I'll go back to the manuscript. So here we can see I have a manuscript with several chapters, several scenes, and it currently has 6,000 words. As I mentioned, I'm going to start with Find and Replace. You can edit this Find submenu here, and you can do Find, Find Next, Find Previous. I find these most useful so I can find the keyboard shortcuts for them. So I almost always do Command F. This is probably Control F on the PC. But just look under that Edit Find submenu and you'll see what they are for your particular platform. And so if I come back here, I can do Command F. It brings up this Find window. Again, we're all pretty familiar with how this works from using Word or Google Docs or what have you. But we can look for something like Hummingbird, and it will search for that. If I bring that up again, I can just continue to hit next if I want, or I can do something like Command G to find the next one. So you can scroll through the instances of that string that you've put in there. If I bring up that window again, you can see that you have both Find and Replace. Again, a very similar option to what you find in other tools. Shiv is a sculptor, and she sculpts these little figurines out of soulstone, which can come to life if a soul is introduced into them. And so she's made this hummingbird early on in the story, but maybe I want that to be an owl or something like that. So there's Find Next and Previous, just like there is with the keyboard shortcuts. And then I can do the Replace as well. So whatever I've selected here in the Find, I can replace with whatever I put in the Replace. And if I do the Next, it will replace the current instance of this. So if I do Replace here, we can see that this instance of She Took the Hummingbird was changed to She Took the Owl. Now, note that it only did that one. And also it didn't search again. So if we do next. I could do a replace, or I could do replace and find. So in this case, it would do a replace and then find the next one. So it's just a way of moving through the manuscript more quickly if you're changing a lot of these things at once. So I could do replace and find. It'll change that instance like it just did over here, and then search for the next one. And so now that's in context. And so I can replace that one and do a find. I can just keep going and going and going. Now I can also do a replace all. Be very careful with this. I've run into so many circumstances where I forget that what I'm replacing, like let's say dragon. I have a dragon-based series called The Book of the Holt. And if I searched for and replaced dragon with Drake, for example, I would be, in that case, replacing both dragon and dragons and dragonback and all other instances where dragon is showing up. So you just have to be careful of the context to make sure that what you're searching for is what you really want to replace throughout the document if you're doing a replace all. Note also that you can replace and search in a certain scope. You can look for the entire document that you have selected in your scrivenings or the selected text. Okay, let's swing back to the find options in the find window. Now this applies to anything that you've put into this find string here. There's this ignore case, so it will match either uppercase or lowercase if you have that checked. Otherwise it will pay attention to upper and lowercase. And then this ignore diacritics. Diacritics are those add-ons to letters like the cedilla under a C, or umlauts, or the accents on E's or A's in French writing. The most common way to use this is probably to ignore them, but there may be a case. I had a character in one of my series, a desert-based fantasy, with a character named Cheda, and the C in the beginning had a cedilla on it. And there were cases where her name was just a regular C, EDA. I wanted to find all those that were wrong so I could correct them basically. So that's just an option you have available to you. And under this pick list, there's contains, which is probably the most common example. It'll find it no matter where it exists in the word. So hummingbird will match both hummingbird and hummingbirds. You may want to do starts with. So if you looked for hummingbird, it will match both hummingbird and hummingbirds and hummingbird apostrophe S. Or, for example, if you wanted to look for both soul and soul stone, I have a case where I have soul stone, which Shiv sculpts out of, but then a soul is introduced into it, and so I want to find just either case, for example. So if I look for soul, it will find soul stone, we can see right here. And then if I keep scrolling through here, we can see that it also finds soul. You can also look for whole word. So if we go to the top and I search using that whole word, it'll find hummingbird, these couple instances here, but it will skip hummingbird apostrophe S and also hummingbirds plural. So let me go back to the top. If we do Command G or Control G, it'll find hummingbird again. And then it skipped those other two instances of hummingbird apostrophe S and plural hummingbirds. And then ends with is similar to starts with. It's just going to find if it ends with that string. So maybe I'm looking for occurrences of stone, which would, if we use ends with, find both soul stone and just regular stone. So here we see it finds soul stone, a couple more, and then it finds stone just by itself. And lastly, there are regular expressions. I'm going to show you a regular expression in my end of manuscript checks that I run before I send in the manuscript to my agent or editor. For now, just understand that this exists. You can look up what those are and maybe some common scenarios that you might use on your own. But I'll give you one example in just a bit. So what are some common ways that I use this? Well, I write secondary world stuff, either fantasy mostly, but some science fiction, and I might change something. And this is not specific to fantasy or science fiction per se, but I might change some proper name. So I might have a city that I envisioned as Glaeus, but it becomes Glayand in the end. And so I may do a search and replace for that. So changing proper names. Tony might become Antonio, in which case you can just bring up your search. You can do a search for Tony, do a replace with Antonio. You can do the next. You can do the replace and find, replace all, which we talked about. I will also use it to just orient me in the manuscript. In this story, for example, this is a new book that I'm working on, and Shiv, the main character, again, is a sculptor. She has a hummingbird that she messes up in the beginning, and then later on she takes on a commission from a very high-profile client to make a falcon. Maybe I want to get to the place in the manuscript where she agrees to create that falcon, or she's at least asked about it. So I can just do a search for falcon, So I come to the very first occurrence. I knew that I hadn't used Falcon in the manuscript until this point. So it's just kind of a quick way to get me into the right place so I can start working on that particular section of the document. So find is useful just for orientation, basically. And then I mentioned end of manuscript checks. So some of the things that we can look for are invisible characters. Now let me show you one feature. If you go under View, Text Editing, and then Show Invisibles, it will show all of the different characters that are there, including paragraph markers. If you have tabs, those will show up. If you have enter instead of a return character, that will show up a little bit differently. Some keyboards have both enter and return, and spaces as well. And for me, I want my manuscript to be clean. I have indents on the beginning of every paragraph, so I have no need to use tabs in my manuscripts. I don't want extra tabs anywhere else. I don't want any spaces at the end of my paragraph. I just want a paragraph marker. And so I look for that stuff. And the way that you can do that easily is just by showing these invisible characters, and then you can copy some of them. So just for example, if I'm looking for tabs, let's say I have a couple of tabs that I forgot, or perhaps somebody else that I'm working on the manuscript added. I worked with an editor and he added some, so I had to find them and get rid of them. If I have these three, notice they show up a little bit odd depending on where the tab actually shows up in the paragraph. But if I do a selection, then just Command C, copy that, and then go to my Find window, and then I can paste that here and see that it shows now that tab character. And now I can just search for next, and you see how it found that one. And I can do Command G, and it goes to the next one, and so on. Now I can do a find and replace via the find window, or sometimes if there's not that many, I'll just go through it and just get rid of them. So I just backspace because it found and selected that tab character. I'll go to the next one, get rid of it, go to the next one, get rid of it. Again, I could do that in a more automated fashion through this window and the replace features. Now, another very common example is having a space at the end, and no one's going to see it. It's not a big deal, but I don't like it. So I want to get rid of it. So if I go here and I select those two characters, the space and the paragraph, I can copy those. And if I do a find and then a paste in here, you can't really see it because it doesn't show that one here, the space, but you can use your arrow keys. So if I do a search, it'll find those occurrences. So let's say I had several of these as well. And if I scroll through, I'll find the same thing. Now, I can get rid of those in a similar manner. Notice if you hit delete, it'll get rid of both of them because I have two characters selected at this point. And I don't want that. I just want to get rid of the one space at the end there. All right, so that's me being a little bit picky. One more common example that I think everybody will want to have is double spaces. I hate them. And they show up all the time. It's my fault. I'm just editing and you don't always see at the end. Like if I got rid of this if I double click it and get rid of it, sometimes there are just two spaces that show up. Sometimes the editor is smart enough to get rid of it. Sometimes it's not. Or if I'm at the end here and I can't see in my normal cases, I don't see these invisibles and I just get rid of them, I'll have a couple double spaces. So let me just add a few randomly here. You can just bring up the find and hit space twice and then do a search and it will find those again. So we see the four occurrences here. Now in this case, there's two selected. I could just hit space and it'll replace the two with the one, and I'll go to the next one, replace it. And again, I could do it in a more automated fashion. Here again, it's at the end of a paragraph, so get rid of that one. One last example of this kind of search is a paragraph followed by a space at the beginning of the next paragraph. And in this case, you can go to the beginning of that paragraph character on the previous line, select it by shift and moving over. You can use your mouse as well. But now I have paragraph space instead of space paragraph. So if I copy that, do a find and paste this here, I have the reverse. I have paragraph space. And so if I search for that, I can find that as well. And then just change that so I don't have that anymore. I don't have those leading spaces at the beginning of any paragraph. Okay, at this point, I can get rid of those show invisibles. So I'll go under View, Text Editing, Hide Invisibles to go back to kind of a normal view. Now, I mentioned the regular expressions. One thing I always look for is double words. So had is a valid example, but there are just so many cases and. They show up all the time, and it's just, you just make a slip. You get rid of something, and then you just miss it as you go through the manuscript. As you're reading through, those things become invisible to the eye as you're reading them, and so you very often miss them no matter how many times you go through the manuscript, especially if they show up at the end of one line and the duplicate ends up at the beginning of the next line. So let me just search for that. So the regular expression you can see here. I'm not going to detail what these are. It defines like word boundaries, one or more words with these characters that the regular expression has. Again, it's a programmatic way of finding things within a large set of text. And this particular one, and you can pause this and copy this if you want, make sure that you put in the backslashes, the parens, the plus, all of it as is. And when you do, when you select regular expression and I search for next, it will find double words. So here, for example, is a mistake I did not find in this early manuscript. So bruising to the amber stone. So I just, I find it and get rid of it. And then if I do a Command G, it'll just find the next occurrence of a double word. And so I'll go here and get rid of the, just make a the. So really useful to go through that and avoid some embarrassing mistakes before you turn it in. And then one last thing that I'll mention is that you can search through the comments as well. So when you have text selected in your Scrivenings view, the comments are actually considered part of that text. So we could search for, I'm going to change this back to contains. Now, that's my last name. It is not in my document anywhere, but I have a comment that's tied to me. I kept my name in there. And if you're working on a document with an editor or a co-author, you can leave in your names. It puts that in by default when you create new comments. And so if I do a search, you can see that it found this comment. Or maybe I know there's some comment and I'm just searching for where it was. I can't recall. And so if I look for Ezekiel, we can see that it found Ezekiel inside of this comment. So just understand that comments as you add them or as other people add them become part of the text for search purposes. Okay, so that's find and replace. Let's go on to project search. Project search has a different scope. When we're doing just the Command F, the regular find, it's going to be searching through whatever editor and whatever set of scrivenings is in that editor currently. Recall that we can have multiple editors open. When we're doing that search, it's going to be looking through that current set of scrivenings only, which could be a single scrivening, it could be multiple. So again, if I select multiple scrivenings here, it'll search through all of that text. But your project contains a lot more than just your manuscript. It has things like the research, the plot that you laid out, the world and the different places, the characters that you created and notes on them. There's all kinds of stuff in your project that Scrivener allows you to keep and helps keep you organized. But part of the problem is you forget where everything is. And so that's what project search is for. When you type in something into this project search, and again, you can hide or show it right here. And when you type something in this area, it's going to search through and try to find all these scrivenings that apply. And by apply, I mean which ones contain that string given the operators that you select. And so one very important feature is this little down arrow right here. And so you can search in various things. The most intuitive example is the text. So just like we were searching through the text in a given editor, the project search will search through the text of all scrivenings. The default is all. And by all, it means not just the text, but also the title. So if we click out here, the title of these things, these scrivenings, is what we see here. I'm going to go back to a single editor view, bring up the inspector, and this first subpane here shows the title and the synopsis and the notes. I don't tend to use the synopsis and the notes very much, but you may. I know plenty of people use those extensively as they're creating their project and start to fill things out. They want to detail what the scene is, what it's about, maybe an emotional arc that's going to happen, maybe a setback, and you may do the synopsis, which is kind of the plot, and you may use the notes for other things, maybe some notes to yourself as you're going through the editing process. Maybe you feel like the character isn't snarky enough, or they're too snarky, or they're too evil, or what have you. And you can just make notes that are not really part of the plot per se, but they're part of what you want to notate and remember about this particular scene. And so just keep in mind that those exist. There's a lot of metadata that exists on each of the folders and scenes, any scrivening, really. And so when we're searching, we can search through any of that stuff. And so right now it's set to all. So let me just look for Shiv, for example. And we see it as you type, it finds. You don't have to hit enter for it. And so it finds this folder, Shiv Breaks the Hummingbird. It finds the scene that's tied to that. And notice this next one, this scene, doesn't have Shiv in the title, so it must have Shiv somewhere else, and it happens to be the text. But if it did show up in the synopsis or notes, it would have found it there too. So that's one example. Let me show you Nira. And here we see that it finds not only some of the scrivenings in the manuscript, but also the character document Nira. And that's because the title shows Nira. So it's searching not just in the manuscript, but elsewhere as well. And so maybe you want to search through the titles only. So in this case, I make my titles for the different scenes and such descriptive. And so this might be a quick way to find certain things. Like maybe I want to look for a scene that I know has Jasper in it. And so I look for that, and it finds just the scrivenings where Jasper appears in the title. I could also search just in the text, in which case this changed. It looks now in the documents themselves for Jasper. And one of the nice features is when it searches for that, it puts that into the find. And so if I look here, I did a Command F, bring up the find window, Jasper is in there, even though I didn't bring up find and type that, it's just there. So if I select any of these scrivenings, or all of them if I want, and do Command G for next, or Control G on the PC, it will just start searching for that. And so that's just a nicety. I could also search just in the notes that we mentioned. You made a note and you can't remember where it is. This kind of thing happens to me all the time. By the time I'm done with a book, it might be 40, 50, 60 more chapters. Some of my larger epic fantasies ended up being 80, 90 plus chapters. Remembering where everything is gets very difficult by the end. So this is just a great way to find what you're looking for. So again, you can search for just notes, just synopsis. These keywords here are another set of metadata. If you go under the metadata tab on the inspector, you can see keywords down below. You may tie certain chapters to things like locale. Maybe you want to notate that not just in the synopsis or the notes. Maybe you want to add keywords to notate the actual setting for the scene. So that might be a case where you add the city or region or what have you, kingdom in a fantasy, planet in a science fiction story. And maybe you want to find all of the scenes, scrivenings that have to do with that. And so you search for a keyword and look for Milwaukee or what have you. In my how-to video on Scrivener, we set up the labels so that the scenes could be tied to certain characters and also drive these colors. So Shiv is a label that sets this blue color. And so if I set this search, this project search, to labels only, and I look for Shiv, it'll find the scrivenings that have that particular label. And then status, we haven't talked a lot about, but if we go to this outline view, every scrivening has or can have a status. So if I go here, this is easy to look at. I can see under my manuscript, I have these 3 different scenes, and they each have a status. This one has a first draft. Maybe it's no status. Maybe it's to do. You're just planning it. You haven't done it yet. Maybe it's in progress. And you can mark these and keep track of how far you are in the manuscript using those statuses. And maybe you want to look for everything that's in first draft or everything that's to be done. It's still to do. And so you can do that with that status search. And section type is to do with whether it's a folder or a scene. That's all I use, but some people might use parts, part 1, part 2, part 3 in a book. And so you can search for different types of scrivenings, whether it's a part, a scene, a chapter, etc. And then we come down to these operators, which are similar to what we saw in find, but the context is slightly different. So if we're looking for any word, maybe I'm just looking for Shiv. And let me go back here. I'm going to search through all. And so it'll find any occurrence of Shiv in any document, anywhere. But maybe I want to look for all words. So maybe I want to find scenes where Shiv and Jasper, this prince, appear together. And so I could type in Shiv and Jasper, and it finds these 3 scenes. In each of these, we'll find both Shiv and Jasper. I mentioned before that the find is automatically populated with that. If I bring up find, it'll be looking for Shiv and Jasper. There's so many cases where I'm looking for something like this, where Shiv and Jasper both appear, but I'm really interested in Jasper. So just keep that in mind. If you're really searching for just one or the other, you'll have to come in here and change that search to just look for Jasper. And then exact phrase can be useful. There are all sorts of cases where I remember a part of a scene, but I can't remember which chapter it's in. Again, I have just so many chapters by the end, and I'm going back and I have a note, a mental note to go change something about it. And so maybe I'm looking for biggest idols. And so it'll find that specific phrase in this particular scrivening. It will not find a scrivening that has both biggest and idols, but only when it finds them next to each other, biggest space idols. And then whole word, this is similar again. If I'm looking for hummingbird, but not hummingbirds, that's what it's going to search for. If I do hummingbirds, it'll just be searching for that and not singular hummingbird. So notice that I found this one. You may be fooled into thinking that's what it found, but if I click on this and then do that Control G, we see that hummingbirds does show up in that text. And then we have that regular expression again. So if I wanted to find double words again, the scrivenings that have them, I could do that here. There are other examples that you might use regular expressions for. And then finally, there are these different options. Searching through the manuscript only, that could be a very common option. Like you don't want to look through all your notes on character, world, and plot. You just want to search the manuscript. Or maybe you want to search through a certain binder selection. Maybe you have a whole bunch of notes on your plot or your world, and you want to find something in there. So for Shiv, she's a sculptor. Let me just put this in here. I've selected characters, and if I go up here and I'm looking through the binder selection only, searching through all of the different metadata, the text and more, and then look for sculptor and spell it correctly, it'll find just Shiv. So it's just searching through that one binder selection. Whereas if I get rid of that, so these are check marks. So I can uncheck this basically. And now it's searching through everything. So it found something in the manuscript and in that character section in the binder. You can exclude the trash documents. If you don't, and you don't clear your trash, that will show up, and that can be kind of annoying because you actually don't want to look through those. But maybe you do sometimes. Maybe you deleted something and you want to pull that back, either restore it or find a bit of text that you want to copy back to the manuscript. You can optionally exclude templates. This included and excluded documents are related to the scrivenings checkbox here. Essentially, you can either include or exclude documents for your compile, and you would do that when you're getting ready to create something to give to someone else, a Word document, a PDF, what have you. And you can manually set which ones will be included and excluded. I'm going to cover that in compile, so I won't touch on it much here other than to say these two included and excluded are related to that. So if it's checked, they're included. If it's not checked, they're excluded. And so you can optionally search through those. The default is to search through both, but you can change that if you want. And then case sensitive, like before with regular find, the ignore diacritics again, the cedillas, the umlauts, what have you. And then you can invert the results. Instead of finding the scrivenings that match, you're finding everything else, everything that doesn't match what you're searching for. And then you can reset all the options, go back to the default. That is project search. It's really a way to search one level up. Again, a Scrivener project is something more than just the manuscript. It has a ton of other information, your plans, your notes, your reference material, and you may want to search through all of that stuff. And so project search allows you to do that. Okay, let's cover some common scenarios. Why would you want to use project search? We've talked about finding information in the notes and synopses, in the text itself. You might want to find chapters that need work through the status. They're in a to-do state or a draft state, and you want to work on those. You can also see how things are going with your current project through those same statuses. You might have things marked as a first draft, second draft, final, things like that. And if you just search for those, you can find which ones are pretty far along, which ones need more work, that sort of thing. And then similar to finding a place in your scrivenings where you want to start work, you can also find the scrivenings that you're trying to work on. So maybe you're focusing on a specific character. Like I have Shiv, the main character, I have Jasper, and then I have Shiv's sister, Neera. And maybe I just want to find the ones where Neera is referenced, and so I can kind of focus on her and just work on those scrivenings. Maybe I need to beef her up a little bit, make her a bit more real or testy or lovely or what have you. It just allows you to focus on a certain part, maybe the characters. Project search just allows you to find things that you're looking for in a bunch of different ways. Again, this is something that I use just constantly on a daily basis. Do yourself the favor of familiarizing yourself with all the different options that you have. Be active in using it, and it'll just become more powerful to you as you do. And then lastly, let's move on to collections. Collections are it's a way of organizing your Scrivenings on a more permanent basis. And so let me just start by showing in this binder selector right here. You can optionally show or hide your collections. And so I'll hit the show collections here. And right now I don't have anything. This is a new project. You can add things to collections manually. So if I right click any document and I go to add to collection, it'll create a new collection for me. And by default, it's going to have this new collection name, but I can change that immediately. It has that text selected. So maybe I'm creating one for Shiv, and I'll just hit enter, and now that's saved. And so I have this Shiv collection. If I want to go back to the main manuscript, I'm currently in that collection. And notice now the collections has different options here. There's the collections themselves, there's search results, and then there's the binder. So maybe I want to go back to the binder and see everything. I can do that by clicking here. I can also do that by hitting this little X on the left side here. So it just gets rid of that, but the collection's still there. I can just go back to that anytime. And then maybe I want to add this lower level scene to that same collection. So if I add that, I can see I have new collection, but I also have my existing Shiv collection. And now if I click the Shiv collection, I can see it has 2 Scrivenings in there. And so I can just keep adding to those as I need to. And note as well that you can add other Scrivenings to it. It doesn't have to just be your manuscript again. So I can add this to the Shiv collection. And now if I go back to that collection, I can see that I have a chapter, a scene, and her character outline in that collection. So just a really easy way to group things together for easy access. That's what collections are all about. Now let me show you dynamic collections. So if I'm just going to get rid of this one. I'm going to say, okay. In the last video where I showed how to get into and start using Scrivener, we created labels for the different characters and we added those labels and colors to the Scrivenings in the manuscript. So if I go under right click label, I can see that I've selected Shiv here. And this second one has Nero, the third one has Jasper. And I like to create one collection, a dynamic collection for each of those. Now that this is all set up, now that I have all of my Scrivenings with the right labels, I can come here and I can search for label and then I'll type Shiv. So it's going to find all of the Scrivenings that have that label. So I must have added it already to a given chapter or scene or what have you. It doesn't have to be, again, the manuscript. And so it finds just the folder. I didn't add the scene to it, although I could have. Now under here, I can do save search as a collection, this lowermost selection at the bottom of the project search. It pre-fills it. You can change it if you want to. I'll just keep the same one. And now we have a dynamic collection. So let me go out of here so we can see it just has the one. Now maybe I want to add both the chapter and the scene. So I have now, if I go back to Shiv, I can see that it's added both of those. And similarly, if I add a brand new chapter, so I'm just going to add new folder. And maybe this is a Street Gang Attacks and it's Shiv's chapter. And if I go here, change the label again to Shiv, we can see that it doesn't have one and that's why it's white. If I click Shiv, it'll change that to blue. I can again add a new scene. So if I go back to this dynamic collection, we can see that all 3 of those are in there. If I add now this one to the Shiv label, go back to the dynamic collection, we can see that it's there. So what happens in the end is I have all of my chapters assigned to a specific label, which for me is just the characters. As I mentioned in the previous video, you could have things like setting, maybe New York, Paris, Tokyo, and those are your labels, and you want to set up a dynamic collection for those. That's possible. You could also have a time travel story or a story that spans multiple generations, for example. Well, then you could have one label for each of those, and you can create a dynamic collection for each of those time periods. So this is just yet another very fluid way of organizing your Scrivenings into ways that have meaning for you. There's no set way to do it. It's just what you find value out of. How are you organizing your story? What's going to be most useful to you in the writing process so that you can find what you need, edit it more effectively, more cleanly, and just get to the writing. You know, this is what all this stuff is really meant to do, is to help you organize things and get that off of your mind and then get to things quickly so you can get to the writing process itself. So that was it. That was find and replace, project search, and collections. 3 really powerful tools that I hope that you can get value out of. And now I'd like to open it up to you. Do you have any other uses for collections I didn't cover? Is there anything I missed in Project Search that you use on a regular basis? Or are there any other just before turn-in searches that you use to clean up your manuscript? If so, please share in the comments below. And if you found this video useful, please like and share with others. And as I mentioned, I'm going to have more Scrivener videos. I'm going to do one on compile, another one on the outline and corkboard views. And then I'm also going to get into my core writing videos, things like world building, character creation, plotting, and a bunch more. So hit subscribe to be notified when those come out. Until next time, everyone, dream big, stay positive, and keep writing. Peace, everyone.